Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here, or at Activate Learn on Twitter. Today it's time for another book review, yay! And this time round it's actually a collection of short stories. And the short stories are by a bloke named Carver. Have you heard of Raymond Carver? I did not. I bought this book fairly recently. It was last week actually. I went into the local bookstore. It's an independent bookstore. It's called Ben's Bookstore in East Bentley in Melbourne. You might know of it. It's a great little bookstore. It has just all sorts of different kind of books and a great collection of classics, which I can't seem to find anymore at many of our bookstores, simply because the bookstores are disappearing, unfortunately. So choices in their classics get rather limited. So I picked this one out because, well, it looked interesting, the topic about love. I must admit, I'm a sucker for a love story every so often. Depends on what that love story is, depends on how it's written as well. I'm reading one at the moment which is a love story, but it's freaking my head out so much so that, anyway, I'm not going to even talk about that because I need to get back into just the normality of love, which is really what Carver isn't or doesn't write about. But let me explain. Okay, the book is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. Raymond Carver was an American short story writer, and it explains why I didn't know of him. I hadn't heard of the name. I wasn't also aware of the books that he had written, and given that he was a poet and also he wrote short stories, I don't read poetry, unfortunately. Maybe I should. I don't know, but he was also a short story writer, which is a genre that I don't usually read. So I picked this up because I thought it'll stretch my reading. It says he's a master craftsman of the American short story, so I thought, why not? I'll give it a go. And it is effectively, it says, a powerful collection of stories set in the Northwest among the lonely men and women who drink, fish and play cards to ease the passing of time. And the passing of time is something that we definitely get a feeling of in each of the stories. It was the first by Raymond Carver to be published in the UK, with its spare colloquial narration and razor-sharp sense of how people really communicate. The collection went on to become one of the most influential pieces of literary fiction. Now, I must admit, look, there are 17 stories in the book, and the stories themselves run from anywhere between 3 pages to a bit over, say, 5 pages. They're very, very readable. And what strikes me about his writing style is, like it was explained, it's sparse. Now, I've got to explain something here. Sometimes when I read a book, an author becomes over flowery with his language. He just describes each and every single thing, the leaf of the tree, the environment, and I just freaking get bored sometimes. But this doesn't happen with Carver. He's got this knack of being able to simply, it's kind of like we are an observer of a scene and we're watching the couple communicate with each other through the dialogue that he sends here, and just with a few words he puts that picture in our mind as if we are actually sitting there and taking it all in. We could hear that dialogue, we can see the people. He doesn't have to explain the entire situation. We kind of already find ourselves within that environment. So the language that he uses is quite sparse, but it puts you immediately and directly into the scene itself, and you could picture it quite crystal clear of the people talking in there and what they're going through and their intention of actions. So there are 17 stories in here, and the stories themselves, one of the most surprising thing I found with this is that, you know, when you think of a story, you think there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Something happens, a character goes through a situation that they learn from it at the end, and you know, you finish it and you go, yeah, that was great, you know, I learned something, and it's really interesting, and it makes you feel something. Well, his stories are very different, very different. It's kind of like he's explaining, there's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. He's just describing the middle bit. He's just describing the situation, we're going through that situation, but nothing really happens, if that makes sense. Nothing, there's no beginning. We don't really know where the character has come from. We don't know about their beginnings. We don't know their story. We just know that they're there. We see them bang in the middle of something. We get this feeling that something has happened, or they're thinking about something, or there's just, it's not visible, but you can actually feel it in the story. And then the story goes, but there's no ending. It's kind of like it leaves you thinking about the story and thinking about, well, what did it mean? And what happens here? Sometimes they just ended abruptly. You feel the sense of passing time as well. There was one particular story which goes by the name of the book, what we talk about when we talk about love, and it's about two couples who are sitting around drinking, was it gin? They're drinking anyway, and they're just drinking alcohol, and they're talking about love. Now, this is not something that I would get with friends and talk about, because from the morning right through the evening, they're slowly getting drunk, and they're talking about what love really means. So for the two couples going and delving quite deeply into such a rich topic, I thought, normally people don't do this. I mean, you'd have to be really good friends to talk this way. But the way he writes it, you feel that there's a passing of time. So they start off in the morning, then it becomes the afternoon, and then in the evening. And the way that he writes it is really interesting. So we're enveloped and in the scene, but then he adds these descriptions as afterthoughts. So, we learn there's a dialogue between the couples, and then all of a sudden, Carver would say something like, Laura is a legal secretary. We met in a professional capacity. Before we knew it, it was a courtship. She's 35, 3 years younger than I am. In addition to being in love, we like each other and enjoy each other's company. She's easy to be with. And I think usually any other writer would have put that right up front to set the scene, to set the character. But it's kind of like he bungs it in just as an afterthought, just to kind of confirm, oh, okay, Laura's a legal secretary, we get on along really well. And it's pretty much really interesting how he writes it. Now, my favorite story, the one that I kept really thinking about all the time after this, is one called Tell the Women We're Going. And it is about two guys, Bill and Jerry. They grew up together, they're great mates. One of them gets married, and, they're also friends with the wife. But you get a feeling that there's an undercurrent that Bill and Jerry's, I guess, relationship through the years, they have kids, they both get married, they hang out at Jerry's place. But, I think Jerry's a little twisted in some way, and you kind of get that feeling that something is going to go awry. So I'm reading the story, and you could connect with stuff like this. I'll give you an example. It says they saw each other every Saturday and Sunday, sometimes oftener if it was a holiday. If the weather was good, they'd be over at Jerry's to barbecue hot dogs and turn the kids loose in the wading pool Jerry had got next to nothing. Like a lot of other things he got for them from the mart. Jerry had a nice house. It was up on a hill overlooking the Natches. There were other houses around, but not too close. Jerry was doing all right. When Bill and Linda and Jerry and Carol got together, it was always at Jerry's place, because Jerry had the barbecue and the records and too many kids to drag around. So you're reading this and you go, yeah, I can understand this. This is kind of typical what happens with our friends. But then there's kind of language that changes, and it starts to ring alarm bells. So check out this dialogue. Jerry was staring at the clothesline or the '68 Chevy hardtop that stood in the garage. Bill was thinking how Jerry was getting to be deep, the way he stared all the time and hardly did any talking at all. Bill moved in his chair and lighted a cigarette. He said, anything wrong, man? I mean, you know. Jerry finished his beer and then mashed a can, and he shrugged. You know, he said. Bill nodded. Then Jerry said, how about a little run? That sounds good to me. I'll tell the women we're going. So automatically this puts in my head, right, they've got to speak about something. Something is egging Bill and Jerry on. So as we go through, there's little snippets of dialogue that start to ring alarm bells. They go to a bar. They each had 5 cans of beer and took 2 hours to play 3 racks of rotation and 2 racks of snooker. Riley sitting on a stool and talking and watching them play. Bill always looking at his watch and then looking at Jerry. Bill said, so what do you think, Jerry? I mean, what do you think? And Jerry drained his can and mashed it and stood for a time turning the can in his hand. So automatically we're getting this vision of something's not quite right. He's egging on and he's asking Jerry, what the hell's wrong with you, man? What are you really thinking? And again, alarm bells, alarm bells. So then the next scene, they're on a highway. They're driving in their ute, their car. They see a couple of girls on bicycles, alarm bells. Then Jerry hoots the car and starts to follow them, alarm bells. And just the way it's written, it's very sparse, but you kind of put the picture in your mind. He slowed down when he came nearly even with the girls. He pulled the Chevy onto the shoulder across from them. The girls kept on going with their bicycles, but they looked at each other and laughed. The one on the inside was dark-haired, tall and willowy, and the other was light-haired and smaller. They were both wearing shorts and halters. Bitches, Jerry said. He waited for the cars to pass so he could pull a U-turn. I'll take the brunette, he said. The little one's yours. So already we're going, shit, this is putting a picture in the head about what these 2 guys are doing and where this is actually going. So it turns out that they end up following the girls up to a hillside. The girls get a bit antsy that the fact that they're followed, obviously. But the language and how Jerry is just continuing to harass them and follow them because all he wants to do is get with them. And the language then changes. So he's calling them cunts. Sorry, excuse the language. So, and Bill is sitting beside him, kind of concerned, but not really doing anything and going with it. So towards the end, we see, even though it actually isn't outwardly stated, he said he saw them crouched behind an outcrop because they were trying to get away from them. Maybe they were smiling. Bill took out a cigarette, but he could not get it lit. And then Jerry showed up. It did not matter after that. Okay, we don't know. We're filling in the gaps by ourselves here. Bill had just wanted to fuck, or even to see them naked. On the other hand, it was okay with him if it didn't work out. So Bill was just going with the flow, okay? Not that I'm saying that what he did was right. But get this, he never knew what Jerry wanted, but it started and ended with a rock. Jerry used the same rock on both girls. First on the girl called Sharon, and then on the one that was supposed to be Bill's. So even though we don't see or we don't get told of what actually happened with that rock, you're kind of filling in the picture already through his writing. And so that was the one story that actually haunted me the most, and the one I thought about, and I kept going back to it because of the ominous feeling of the 2 men and how they behaved towards each other, and the women. So if you're interested in short stories, then I would definitely look into Raymond Carver. I think his own history is actually interesting. When he was writing this, apparently he was an alcoholic. so much so that he couldn't write. He didn't have a really good first marriage. He was having a lot of issues, but he went to a writers' conference one day and he met another lady by the name of Tess Gallagher, and she was a poet and I think she's still alive. So she's a poet and a short story writer, and I think it was love. I think it was just he found his place. He found her. She was able to put everything right in his life, and he got to the point where he sobered up and he just churned out so much good work at this time. And I think just reading about this love story and the fact that artists out there who could be so pained, so emotional, and unable to deal with life, and have to take to the bottle just to find an escape, but for their genius. But then in comes someone else who can totally understand them and accept them for who they are, for what they do, and could help them bring that out. So Tess did that with Carver here. So very interesting book. I would definitely read more of his stuff. That has intrigued me. And I'm actually quite glad that I read a short story that is very different to kind of like the beginning, the middle, the end. It's something that I'd be able to pick up and read anytime, again in the future. I think as I read them again, more of the stories and more of the ideas will come out. So maybe I think these stories require possibly 2 or 3 sittings of repeating. But I think really nice stories. Well, not nice. I should actually not use the word nice anymore. They're stories that obviously are about love, but it's not kind of like overly sickly. They're quite dark in some, quite dark. They're quite normal. They show up the fears that we humans have in our relationships. Anyway, yeah, that's it. I'm going to finish it there. So, Carver's what we talk about when we talk about love. Thanks for listening and watching. Bye.